Welcome back to another episode of the Owl Talk podcast. This is Joe Palazzolo, and the theme of today's podcast is more of a classic fireside chat. Some of our listeners who are students of history will know that President Franklin Roosevelt used to give short radio addresses in the 1930s and early 1940s, addressing a variety of topics in the country. Well, today's episode is the first of what I hope will be some ongoing fireside chat style conversations with Sigma Pi Fraternity's current Grand Sage Christian Miele, and hopefully with other Grand Sages in the future. And to start ourselves off on this chat, I'd like to officially welcome Christian back to the Owl Talk podcast. Welcome back, brother.
Joe, it's great to be with you again. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. You know, it's interesting, Christian. I always put together a short script for myself when I'm recording these podcasts because I want the final product to be crisp and tight for the listeners. However, for these fireside chats, I think just go free flow back and forth across a few different topics. So maybe to start, you can give the listeners a brief update on what you did and where you went earlier this month.
Yeah, so we're recording this on October 15th, 2024, this past, which is a Tuesday, but this past Saturday, the Grand Council was in Nashville, Tennessee for a board retreat where we were discussing some of the high-level strategic initiatives of the fraternity, reviewing and evaluating our strategic plan, talking about a lot of the great programs and resources that we're making available to our undergraduate members, talking about alumni engagement, talking about ritual education, recruitment, and a whole host of other things that we're really excited about. So it was a great time for the members of the council to join with our CEO and COO and our general counsel to discuss where we're going, where the fraternity is heading, and also to spend some time as brothers, building synergy for our team of both volunteer and paid professional leaders as we chart the next direction for this thing we call Sigma Pi. So it was a very, very productive weekend for sure.
That's great. And, I'm really happy to hear that you and the Grand Council got together in person for that retreat. You know, when my first term as Grand Sage started, it feels like a million years ago at this point, I had a plan to have 4 in-person meetings of the Grand Council every year. There would be one in the fall, one at the mid-year leadership conference back when that conference was in person, one later in the spring, and then one at the fraternity's summer event, whether that was Convocation or Sigma Pi University, when we used to operate that as a separate event. And we were doing pretty well staying close to that schedule. And then, of course, COVID happened and the whole world ended. So maybe you can talk to our listeners about the difference in working on the fraternity's national business in an in-person setting versus doing it on Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, you really can't compare. I mean, so we were in a boardroom actually, for the better part of 8 or 9 hours. And the level of conversation you can have when there's no time constraints, because for the Grand Council members, I'm sure many of the listeners know we're all volunteers. So we all have, our day jobs and other obligations, family, et cetera. And so, typically the Grand Council meets, on average once every 2 weeks, usually on a Friday afternoon. And it's usually about an hour, maybe 90 minutes and, different touch points that we have. Whereas this was, being in person and, everything from just seeing body language and just, being able to really engage with your brothers in those higher level conversations that you can't just do over Zoom. It just doesn't lend itself to have those same, the same kind of impact. So it was great. I mean, and I haven't seen these brothers since Convocation this past summer. So it's always good to be among, friends and brothers as well. And, we watched a little bit of football together over the course of the weekend and, toured sights and sounds of Nashville. And so we do like to have fun too, of course. And, but yeah, it's like you said, it's important that we do meet in person rather than just see each other in these little, Brady Bunch squares on a Zoom call.
Boy, can you believe Convocation was just over 4 months ago?
Yeah, we just wrapped up Q1 of year one, and so yeah, we're already in the full swing of the new biennium, and really excited to share with you some of the stuff that we're working on.
So let's talk about some of the stuff you're working on. I know when you and the council were together, you talked a little bit about the growth opportunities task force and the work that they're engaging in. So maybe for our listeners, maybe you can talk about that task force and some of the bigger projects that they're working on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Growth Opportunities Task Force fundamentally is focused on the alumni experience and engaging Sigma Pi alumni in a very intentional way as we try to make real the mission statement of the fraternity, which talks about the lifelong development of brothers. Obviously, that you can't have lifelong development unless you are part of a lifelong organization. And so, how do we ensure that, and really, I look at everything we're doing right now in three phases, right? So, it starts with the new member journey and building that passion and love and affinity for Sigma Pi from day one, having a great undergraduate experience filled with values based education and all of the learning and growth opportunities that come with being an active member of Sigma Pi at a chapter. But then when you think about it, after your 4 years, if you're in the fraternity for 4 years as an undergraduate, the rest of your life is a long time, we hope. And so we want to make sure that there are plenty of opportunities to be a part of Sigma Pi for the rest of your life. So it wasn't something you did just in college, but something that is an ongoing thing that you do for the rest of your days. And so the Growth Opportunities Task Force is squarely focused on what do our alumni clubs look like? What is their purpose? What do they offer both for the alumni and what can they be doing to support our chapters? And so we are heavily engaged with focus grouping and surveying both internally with our stakeholders in Sigma Pi, our current alumni members and alumni club leaders, as well as our peer fraternities, our peer national fraternities and sororities, some of whom have demonstrated that they do a remarkable job of alumni engagement and literally have thousands upon thousands of alumni members at their national events and conventions. And so, looking at what some of our peers do, I'm interested to see what we might be able to do differently to attract more Sigma Pi men to be thinking about this more long term in terms of their membership commitment. And so tonight, for example, we're having the second of a series of listening sessions where we're talking about, survey questions about the alumni experience and alumni clubs specifically, and what that vehicle can do to continue to engage these men for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of the things that I remember from my time on the Grand Council that I was really proud of is that when you looked at the number of donors that we had to the foundation, we weren't really tracking Sigma Pi University back then. Um, the trend line went straight up through the end of my term, and I was really happy about that because I thought it was a great symbol that hey, there's guys out there who want to be involved, and the way that we had instructed them or asked them to be involved at the time was, hey, write a check, and they did, and it was great, and that number went up and up, and I thought it was a really strong indication that our alumni want this engagement that you're talking about. Maybe for some of the listeners who are not as deep in this world as I have been and you are, maybe you can just give a brief thought or two about what are some of those other organizations doing? Like, what does their success look like for alumni engagement that we might bring over to Sigma Pi fraternity?
Okay, well, fundamentally, Joe, I think the core difference between what we do in other organizations, specifically the MPHC, which is your historically African American fraternities and sororities, they have what are known as graduate chapters. So kind of similar to an alumni club, but I would argue and assert that our alumni clubs mostly exist for the social benefit of the alumni club's members. They have golf outings, they have reunions and get-togethers and picnics and things of that nature. Other alumni clubs may focus more on raising money for their local undergraduate chapter, right? So either a scholarship or a CEF, Chapter Educational Fund, to raise money for educational programs. But there's no real uniform way to be an alumni club. Whereas these graduate chapters and some of these other organizations, they actually have like regular meetings, just like a chapter does. They may not be as frequent, maybe it's quarterly or monthly, but they actually do initiation as well, and that's something that Sigma Pi really our alumni clubs don't do. If you look at an alumni club charter versus a chapter charter, the one obvious and conspicuous difference is alumni clubs do not have the power to initiate new members into the organization. And so most Sigma Pi's join through a collegiate chapter. And so we're kind of taking a look at that and saying, are we missing something? Just because you didn't join Sigma Pi between the ages of 18 and 22, are you barred from membership? Or can you join as a graduate student or postgraduate or even a successful person in the workforce that maybe has a few friends in Sigma Pi and believes in its mission of giving back to college students, believes in the idea of service and the importance of good scholarship and kind of training the leaders of tomorrow. And so there are a lot of other fraternal organizations show outside of the Greek letter world that also do this. The Knights of Columbus and the Freemasons and the Lions clubs of the world. They all have a adult membership to contrast versus a college student only membership where you can join when you're 70 years old. And so we're going to take a serious look at that because, again, we are a lifelong organization. Why limit the power of Sigma Pi and how it can transform lives to just joining during your college years? And so we're going to be talking to our peers about that, figuring out how they do this and do it so well. Because, again, as I mentioned, they have just tremendous turnout at their events, which means more probably money raised to support chapters, to support housing, potentially scholarships, and all of these other things that we believe are important.
I just want to paint a picture in terms of turnout at events at some of these other groups, particularly the the NPHC groups. A former colleague of mine, we used to work together a number of years ago. She was one of the leaders of her sororities, Delta Sigma Theta, historically Black and African American sorority. She was one of their leaders of their local alumni chapter here in Central New Jersey, and we used to chat once in a while, particularly when I was the Grand Sage, and we would talk about fraternity and sorority life. And I remember one day she said, our graduate chapter is finally opening up for recruitment next month. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, we close ourselves for recruitment because the number is too high. And I thought, that's curious. And then a month went by and I said to her, I said, hey, did you open up for recruitment? She said, oh my goodness, we opened up for recruitment. We had to close it within a week. We had 600 people sign up. 600 people sign up. It's just mind blowing. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the success that those organizations have,
Well,
we
they
should
have
be
they
we
have
should
new
be
member
doing
class.
that.
They have new member classes of postgraduate folks who are joining. It's probably like night school or something like that. But we're asking all those questions, and that's why. So with the NPHC groups and our partners in the NIC and the NPC, which are your other national fraternity and sorority organizations, we're doing a number of both interview style focus groups, 60 to 90 minutes, where we're having some really good qualitative conversations, but also asking them about what's the dues commitment if you're an alum member of one of these grad chapters, and what type of service projects do you do? What do you actually do as a graduate chapter that our members might be interested in knowing about? So, I think it's just important fundamentally to kind of look at what other successful groups are doing out there and see what makes the most sense for Sigma Pi.
Yeah, and I love that you all are doing this. Maybe we can shift and talk about some other things going on in the world of Sigma Pi fraternity. I think and of course I know, we're at the time of the year when our southern and some of our western chapters are taking their big new member classes. So for the listeners out there, recruitment season is of course year round. We know that, but for our chapters in the south and parts of the west, the big recruitment season is in the fall semester. While for our chapters in the Northeast and the Mid Atlantic, the big recruitment season is in the spring. So maybe we'll have this conversation about them in the spring. But can you take us inside what you're seeing across the country when it comes to those chapters who are in their big recruitment season right now?
Yeah, well, a lot of them get started, especially at the SEC schools down south. A lot of them get started even before boots are on the ground and classes resume. And it's like a military operation. I mean, they really have project plans in place, and they really have a good idea of what they need to do to be prepared for the rush of new students coming in. And so we're seeing some great numbers from the schools that have those big fall recruitments, Joe. And we're really excited about what our Sigma Pi chapters are doing. And I think why they're getting such a great return is they're really doing a good job of communicating the value of this organization to those incoming freshmen and sophomores in particular, and they're really selling them on the power of Sigma Pi, and that's a great thing to see. And the fact that we have all these great educational programs. We have this Engage program. We've got our province workshops. I mean, we're offering all this additional leadership development and personal growth opportunity for these students. And our chapters are talking about those programs and the impact they've had on their lives and in their chapters. And I think that's just another value add. If you're somebody going through recruitment, you have all these choices between all these fraternities. But, I think the passion that, and sort of the excitement that's being exuded by our members is having some effect out there in the recruitment process because our numbers are going up. And that's a great thing to see.
Recruitment is always an interesting thing for us to track on social media, Christian. What have you seen? I know you get better numbers than we do. What have you seen in terms of the success that our chapters are having this semester?
Yeah, well, Joe, it looks like we had some pretty big pledge classes, some numbers being reported. We got, I think it was 88 at our Ole Miss chapter. I think we had just under maybe 60 at Alabama, somewhere in the 40s with both our Kentucky chapter and our chapter at the University of Arkansas, our Rowan chapter, New Jersey 23. So some really really strong numbers being reported. So yeah, again, hats off to our chapter recruitment teams and our leaders at these groups for really doing a great job, growing the fraternity.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love to see those numbers, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next set of big numbers, which again for the Northeast and Mid Atlantic chapters should be in the spring. Maybe we can shift gears here a little bit. Just since we're free flowing, maybe you can talk a little bit about the Ritual Committee and some of the efforts that they're putting together regarding ritual education.
Yeah, sure. So, issue near and dear to my heart, of course, Ritual Committee. I've really tasked them with doing a couple things. Got a great committee. It's being led by Bailey Joseph, and he, of course, was our elections board chair at the previous biennium. And one, I wanted to, I had mentioned earlier that we're kind of looking at all three phases of fraternity membership or Sigma Pi membership, and that being, the new member journey, your undergraduate experience and your alumni experience. And so this really gets at what happens after your Bayard member experience and you get initiated, and then what happens. So obviously there's a lot of educational resources, both at the university level and, through the national organization, be it, the Engage program that I mentioned or Tony Cyrus Leadership Summit or even your province workshops. But what else are we doing to talk about the specific values that are espoused in our ritual and in our creed? And so I really have challenged them to be looking at our Master of Ritual program as perhaps the vehicle for ongoing member education for the values-based piece. And so we're also, going to be doing a ritual inventory and a ritual survey for all of our chapters to make sure that all the chapters have all of the ritual items that they need to perform our ceremonies and to just kind of take stock of what they're doing in the way of ritual education already. So is the chapter herald conducting a ritual seminar or workshop once a semester, once a year, or not at all? And if not at all, why not? And what can we do to help? What can the committee do to help more specifically? And so, one of the things that makes us different than any other fraternity is, of course, our history. But the other big one, of course, is our ritual. And so, I really care deeply about making sure that our members are understanding the meaning behind our rituals and our lessons and the truths that are to be learned there and applied to their lives so that they can become better men. And so, yeah, we're excited about that work that's being undertaken right now.
It's important work. It's important work. I'll be curious to see the results of the ritual equipment survey, only because when I was traveling around the country and folks would show me the ritual equipment or I would sit in on ritual, boy, we can get creative on the things we use for ritual equipment. So I'll be curious to see what the committee comes up with. Hey,
Yeah.
let's talk about connections to the chapters. Talking about traveling around. I'm a big believer that our national leaders need to be present to the membership, and the most active population in the membership is our undergraduates. So I appreciate that you connect with so many of the undergraduates on a regular basis. What are some of the things that you're hearing from our undergraduates this semester?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just, being on most of the social media channels, it's like sources of pride every time I see the good work that these men are doing on their campuses throughout the country, because it means they get it. They understand what our organization, what the purpose of the organization is, and what they can do to live our creed and to live those values, and to see some of the great stuff that's happening right now. Again, just sources of pride. So, for example, the other day I saw a chapter was cleaning the headstones of military veterans, departed military veterans. Of course, you always see lots and lots of service projects serving either the campus or the local community, or some philanthropic or charitable cause. And there's some really innovative ways to engage their fellow students who aren't members of Sigma Pi, and getting them sort of involved in these events. And you just love to see it. So I've also seen a lot of inter-chapter travel, which I also think is great. I love seeing that as well. And I think one of the previous episodes when you and I were chatting, we were talking about the unlikely bond between our guys from our Arkansas chapter and our guys from our St. John's chapter in Queens, New York. And, culturally they're from different parts of the country, but you'd never know it just because, of the bonds of brotherhood that they've shared together starting at convocation. I think there's been a couple of return visits since convocation, things of that nature. So yeah, just really, really, excited and proud of these guys for all the good work they're doing throughout the country. So I encourage them to not only keep it up, but to make sure to continue to communicate all the good stuff they're doing, because we want our campus partners, we want the parents and guardians of our members to see the good work that they're doing. And also Parents Weekend. That's another big thing I love to see, is just getting the families involved, because obviously fraternity carries with it a certain amount of stigma and negative publicity. But I love when our undergraduate members can include their parents, have them by the house or at a homecoming event or a tailgate, to just see the value that their son is getting out of Sigma Pi. I just love to see that.
Yeah, the communication part is key, Christian. I couldn't agree more. And I find that many of our chapters, social media is their main method of communication, which is different for guys, you're my age. When we were running our chapters, there's no social media. You had to put together maybe an email, which was still kind of new, or put together a written piece of
I
information
mean,
and send it out.
to date myself to our listeners, my first office in my chapter was as Herald, and I literally had a disposable camera and I would take, pictures, and I have to go get the film developed. I mean, that makes me sound like a dinosaur, I know, but like that was our social media. I mean, we put together literal scrapbooks of pictures for each year. I mean, that was Instagram back then.
And there are chapters around the country who still have those scrapbooks, because I remember when I traveled, I saw them. I agree with you. At the social media on Parents Weekend is always awesome. We just had our Parents Weekend here at Monmouth a few weeks ago, and it was amazing. I always get a kick out of the Sigma puppies and the Sigma paws. I've seen a couple of those this semester. There were a lot of pious Sigma pies. We've had a couple of those things going on. Those are always good
Yeah.
ways to raise a couple of bucks. For
And a
some
lot of
reason,
mental health stuff too. I love that you're, in your province in New Jersey. I mean, the relationship you have with NAMI and other organizations, nonprofits, and advocacy groups that are focused on men's mental health. I think that just is so awesome to see that partnership blossom in your neck of the woods.
yeah, it's been beneficial for our chapters and for the province overall. So, to everyone out there listening, check out the social media. I just saw, before we got on, I saw a couple of Sigma Pi car wash ones. I know the boys down at Coastal did one, which seems to make sense where they are. But the guys up in Michigan just did one, which had to be freezing cold. So good for them for going out there and making that happen. Let me shift again. Um, One of the projects that I'm happy to be working on with you is this upcoming live stream celebration for Founders Day. Maybe you can bring our listeners inside what the plan is for that online event.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're extremely excited to announce, and we'll continue to be kind of rolling this out with some videos and some other promo stuff. But we're going to be doing and holding our first ever national live stream celebration of Founders Day. Obviously, this coming February, to celebrate the 128th birthday of our fraternity. And so, um, uh, yours truly and past Grand Sage Palazzolo, the two of us guys, are going to be doing what we hope will be a very informative and engaging talk on the lost history of Sigma Pi, things that we've discovered in doing a lot of research on the origin story of our fraternity in the early years of Sigma Pi, how it came to be. And, with technology, we were talking about our lack of technology and lack of social media, but with the advent of document digitization in recent years, we now have access to newspaper accounts and yearbooks from 1897 and the early years of the organization, which have really deepened our understanding and really reshaped our understanding of the fraternity's origin and early history, its founding, and letters from the founders, and the whole thing. So, with the advent of document digitization technology, we now have access to newspaper accounts from 1897 and college yearbooks from our earliest chapters and their university yearbooks. And so now we just have a fundamentally better understanding and deeper understanding of the origin and founding of our fraternity. So Joe and I are going to be sharing that on the live stream. And we're also going to be talking about ways that, because it's going to be both for obviously undergraduates and our alumni members, we're also going to talk about ways that we can all give back to the organization too. So we're excited about talking about some of our programs and educational initiatives as well. So it's going to be a great celebration. Again, first time we're ever doing this. So we certainly hope that you'll join us. We'll have the date and the login information and all that stuff available to our members soon. But please mark your calendars for late February for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Christian. It's going to be a lot of fun. For the listeners who don't know, a couple of years ago in San Antonio, at Convocation, I gave a speech during one of our luncheons about the history of Robert George Patterson and how he helped Sigma Pi get its name, and then what happened to him afterwards. And there's a much more fascinating story there than we keep in our Sigma Pi manual and that we have historically told. So I'll bring some of that into the conversation in late February. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. And hey, how many opportunities do Sigma Pi history nerds like you and I get to go out there and tell the world about all this stuff that we've learned,
Not nearly enough.
I
But
agree.
no, it's going to be great. We're really looking forward to a great turnout, and we do hope you'll join us. And specifically, what we're doing is we're not holding the event on actual Founders Day, because we know a lot of your chapters out there do like to do programs and celebrations on that particular date, but it will be a day or two before or after. So it'll be in close proximity, but just know if you do an annual celebration on the day, this won't be a conflict. So we do hope that you can do both.
There you go. All right, Christian. Hey, thanks for having this fireside chat with me and for our listeners. Do you have any parting thoughts for the listeners?
Yeah, it was fun. Well, Joe, thanks again for having me. Yeah, I do hope to do this on a more kind of frequent basis. And feel free to always reach out, grandsage@sigmapi.org, if you have any questions, ideas, things that are working well on your campuses. We'd love to hear about it. Again, we just had that Grand Council retreat, and we shared a lot of our success stories, that we're hearing around the country. So it's been a great first couple months on the job, but we're looking forward to the rest of what this year and this biennium have in store for the fraternity.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian, for being a guest on Owl Talk and bringing us our first fireside chat. And thank you to everyone who listened to today's episode. For the latest on what's going on in the world of Sigma Pi fraternity, follow us across social media. We are at Sigma Pi, all one word, on Instagram, X, and Facebook. On YouTube, we are at Sigma Pi fraternity. That is also all one word. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to everyone joining us for the next Owl Talk podcast.